Hello, everyone, and welcome to another special edition of the Data Resilience SpectrumCast. Joined, as always, by our esteemed colleagues, Randy, Sean, and Tricia. Thanks, Tricia. Tricia, it looks like you're a little on vacation this week.
I am in Lake Tahoe this week.
Ooh, nice. Shooting on location this week.
Shooting on location, nice. That's right.
Well, thanks for joining it and being available for us. This week,
today's topic is skiing.
Skiing, exactly.
How to improve your slalom times.
So this week on the Data Resilience SpectrumCast, I wanted to kind of take a break from a lot of the topics that we've been talking about. And, we talk about how backup has evolved to data protection, that evolved into modern data protection, that has evolved into data resilience. And this entire space continues to evolve. And one of the things I wanted to talk about today was personal and sensitive information data protection. Companies that accept information from customers or consumers. So think of a bank, you go into a bank, you have to give your ID, you have to give some personal information. Maybe you're using Amazon, buying things online, or AWS, right? You're giving them your credit card. At what point during the entire process is this whole consumer providing sensitive information a part of data protection from the standpoint of de-identifying who it is that has this information? We've seen a lot of regulatory laws, GDPR, the California privacy laws. I kind of want to get a sense of what the group thinks around how is this really impacting us? When should we be thinking about it? Is it a part of kind of this new backup data resilience story we should be telling?
I say we let the Branch Tahoe office go first.
Okay, Branch Tahoe. Branch Tahoe is going to talk about encryption. And I think when we talk about data, so many companies have to have this data. It has to be there maybe for medical reasons or for like universities. They've got a lot of information about the students, and that's got to be kept, and that's part of their business. But it's got to be backed up, and it's got to be backed up securely. And I think that's where we really have to look at when you are doing your backups, what about the encryption? And not only in the transfer across the network, but also the storage of that. And then the second part is, what happens if I back up something I shouldn't have backed up, and I've got to purge that from my backups?
The infamous data spill, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, when you're talking about sensitive personal information, a data protection system is obviously going to come into play, right? Because by its very nature, a data protection system is sucking up every bit of important data in your environment and storing it in a centralized location. And so for me, it's a couple of things. First of all, you're going to have a data protection system and or environment and or hardware that allows for the encryption of data. There's just no getting around that. And of course, Spectrum Protect and Spectrum Protect Plus do that in all of its various storage locations, including disk and tape and container pools and all of that stuff, to where if for some reason that there is some leak or some spill, right, and somebody gets a hold of that data, they're not going to be able to use it for any useful purpose, right? And I mean, to me, we used to kind of count on the format of that data to help protect it, right? Or at least to some extent. And these days, that's just a no-go. You can't do that with any sort of formatting.
Yeah, I think I'll just vehemently agree with both of those points of view. I think data encryption at every phase of its life cycle, from inception to persistence to movement to protection to archive and cold archive and sort of everything in between, encryption plays a critical role in ensuring that that personal information is not accessible to disruptive forces or people who would use it for negative purposes. So I think that's super important. I think it also almost kind of philosophically or culturally starts to put more responsibility or onus on, we as end users or as owners of that data. I think we have to take a little more active role in protecting it and ensuring the provenance and the custody of our personal data. And that's That's not always easy, and it does require some thought and some forethought and some planning. And I think it's just the nature of the reality we live in. I don't think we can completely abscond that responsibility or kind of expect our service providers or retailers or government agencies or financial institutions or healthcare institutions to do it for us. I do think we need to take a more active role in ensuring that our data is protected, whether that's, making sure you're using a VPN of some kind that has a good privacy policy and, good encryption methodology. So I think it's all those things. Plus, I think we as consumers and individuals just have to be a little more cognizant of where our data is and how to protect it ourselves.
So I think we've said three important things, and that's kind of nice. There's three of us. Let's touch on these a little bit. So number one, we all talked about encryption, and obviously encryption is important, but there are companies out there in the market today that go beyond this. Things like de-identification, tokenizing personal information in the data that's being sent to them. So number one is, beyond encryption, how important is that, and what role does that play in the backup space? The second thing we talked about, Randy, you mentioned the end user having more of a set of roles and responsibilities, and I couldn't agree more. And again, a lot of these platforms enable the end user to be able to go in and clean up or fix their information. And the question is, does that build better trust with the vendor? In other words, I can go in and where there's S. Keniston or Steve Keniston or SKE in my social, I can say, oh no, that's really one person. And then the third thing, Sean, you mentioned about kind of data spillage and data sprawl, it kind of goes beyond the mistake of a spill, right? When we talk about things in Spectrum Protect Plus, we talk heavily about data reuse. So now I've got that copy of the data, and I'm using it yet again for DevOps. I'm using it for analytics. Now all of a sudden that personal information is spreading all across the environment. That's got to have some impact as well. So maybe we can touch on each of these three things. Tricia, you want to go with encryption? Randy, go ahead.
I mean, I'll let the experts kind of give the depth on this, but my sort of high level perspective in the abstract is that I think they're all tied together, and I think as we move into the future, and I'll go back to what I said before, I think you're going to see more and more that we as individuals, consumers, citizens, whatever, will have our own, personalized, edge encryption capability, whether it's a biometric sensor of some kind. And I mean, it's already happening, right? All of our devices now have biometric sensors in them. I think the integration of that data chain of custody from my device and my network to whomever and wherever it ends up on the internet, that has to be very tightly integrated. And today it's not. I mean, it's a patchwork of different protocols and standards and providers. So I think there has to be a lot of work around standardizing that chain of custody, if that makes sense. And I don't know if it's even possible, but it strikes me that is almost going to be inevitable. I mean, I think at some point that's going to have to occur, whether it's a government mandate or something that becomes a commercial, market. Or anyway, that's kind of my thought. Got 30,000 feet.
And we talk about data reuse for backups. So if we're taking maybe a database and we want to send it over to a test machine, how are you making sure that the critical information is redacted and that there's not stuff in that database that could easily then be leaked because it was in the test lab versus the production lab? Because it's important to be able to test those and to work with them, but at the same time, you've got to worry about what's actually in that database.
Yeah, we talk about data masking for some of those things, but I think there's probably even more capabilities that are necessary.
Yeah, I mean, for me, kind of thinking like a criminal, right? And being a data protection, data resilience expert, I come back to the thing I want to attack is that data reuse, data protection server. Because if I get the keys to that, I have everything, right?
Yeah.
So a big part of this to me is also how is your data protection, data resilience solution set up? Are there separation of duties for the administrators? What capabilities do they have? if they're compromised, either accidentally or deliberately, to access that information. So all of those things, doing that properly, having proper separation of duties, all of those things is absolutely critical to protecting sensitive personal information. And unfortunately, it's a tremendous amount of work, right? Doing it right is not an easy thing at all.
Well, and as I always say, I'm kind of the neophyte in the data protection space. You guys tell me. I would imagine that something like multi-factor authentication becomes increasingly important. And how do you implement that on such a massive scale, right? I mean, there's exabytes and yottabytes of data that are archived and stored offline and on tapes and in backup servers. How do you even begin to implement some kind of a multi-factor authentication or protection scheme at that scale? I don't think you can, right?
It's hard. It's a tremendous amount of work.
It's kind of like the whole data classification thing. We were talking about it 10 years ago. Nobody did it. We're here today. We need multi-factor authentication. We don't want to look back 10 years from today and say, oh, we should have, right? So I think it's pretty important.
But we will.
Right, we will. Right.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's the reality, right? Some people are going to look at this investment and think, oh, I can get by without making it, right? And unfortunately, these hacks, these data spills, these incidents, the spilling of sensitive personal information is just getting to be more and more and more and more out there. So your risks are going up and up and up.
Well, and not only are the risks going up, but the scale of the risk is increasing as well. So the individual risk vectors are more persistent and more troubling. There's also many, many, many more of them, and they're growing kind of asymptotically. And now I sat through a WebEx on from the systems group, I don't know, a couple of weeks ago, talking about quantum computing and kind of the state of the art and quantum computing. One of the biggest targeted use cases right now for quantum computing is security, right? So the
breaking
goal
encryption.
is to develop quantum safe encryption technologies. So it's really interesting to me that advancement in computing, the first practical application is, okay, we can use this to create much more sophisticated, much more difficult to break encryption algorithms. So that, I think that tells you all you need. I mean, yes, obviously it'll be used for life sciences research and all the things you would normally expect supercomputers and high performance computing to be applied to. But the fact that that's the first target, I think speaks volumes.
We can use this technology to make a new problem that we have to solve with more technology.
Yeah,
it goes back to when you're protecting that data that's been encrypted. When you think about the layers of encryption and the people that've got to coordinate. So maybe the supercomputer encrypted it, but it's sitting on an operating system that when the backup comes and opens that file, it unencrypts it. So just really understanding who's encrypting, what am I backing up? Am I leaving it encrypted? Am I encrypting it in flight? So it goes back to Sean's comment about there's so many players and so many technologies, encryption and technology, it's not just one. Are we complementing each other or are we stepping on each other?
RFID bioimplants that's the only answer. It's got to happen.
Well, I think we've done a really good job at kind of highlighting kind of the next generation or the next evolution, what's going to be taking place in data protection and what people need to think about. And Randy, I think your point is dead on. I think that, maybe if we want to, do it earlier this time and take a spin on the wheel of misfortune, these are all the reasons why, we need to start paying even heavier attention to this, because once the bad actors are in, we are in a lot of trouble.
Glad you asked. Okay, so let's come over here for a second.
Yeah, what do we got this week?
As always, fertile ground for so there's obviously there have been a ton of recent data breaches and cyber attacks. They're happening. There's all the very well publicized ones, the Continental Pipeline. They're actually here locally to us in Massachusetts, the Steamship Authority, which runs the ferries between the mainland and Martha's Vineyard and Nantucket, was attacked a while back. So this is becoming a big issue. It's also now the attackers are also spreading out and going into state and municipal systems now too. So if you just look at the kind of top news hits here, they're state and municipal level. So while the targets are still kind of big, infrastructure and big multinational corporations, they are also scaling down. And this is for all the reasons we've talked about before. It's easier, it's profitable, and with the advent of cryptocurrency, it makes it much easier for these hackers to get paid and to actually extract the ransoms from their victims. So all those reasons are driving this. So as again we've talked about, it's certainly not getting better. If anything, it's getting worse and even more widespread. Interestingly, and probably the biggest relevant news in this space over the last 48 hours. Of course, the Biden-Putin summit, and one of the key discussion points within that summit, not surprisingly, was the cyber attacks, the recent cyber attacks that have been traced back to, criminal organizations within Russia, not necessarily believed to be state-sponsored. However, who knows? And that was one of the key talking points and one of the key issues that was raised during the discussion. And interestingly, they tacitly agreed to fence off certain parts of their economy, in effect, that are off limits, which, if you think about that, is mind-boggling. This is almost like a new SALT treaty. Like, look, we promise not to attack your nuclear power plants if you promise not to attack our municipal water systems. I mean, it's crazy that it's at this point, but this is where we are. I think until we have hardened our infrastructure to the point where we can actively prevent these kinds of attacks and detect them and prevent them and quickly recover from them, it's going to be this kind of weird diplomatic horse trading at a global level, which is really fascinating. It's fascinating and kind of terrifying in a way, if you think about it, because there has to be within this an element of kind of trust and communication, which clearly is suspect at best, right? So I think we're in a really, really interesting and incredibly challenging time as it relates to not just the issues we're talking about today, but in the broader sense, how vulnerable our infrastructure is to attacks from hostile forces. So it's pretty sobering. So, hey, Tricia, enjoy your vacation this week.
Well, I mean, it's interesting we're talking about it. I live in New Orleans, and New Orleans, of course, everybody knows about Katrina, right? And all the flooding that occurred in New Orleans. And New Orleans is totally dependent on a pumping system that is run by electricity to pump out water when it rains. So if you attack that pumping system, I mean, not only is it an inconvenience, like, oh, my electricity is off, right? Yeah. But all of a sudden you're putting people under 10 feet of water and literally killing them from the flood, right? So it's a point of warfare. Yeah, certainly can be.
Or what if you, for instance, chose to disable the Texas power grid during a rare cold snap? I mean, there's a million different possibilities or threat vectors that can be exploited here, situational and otherwise, and it's deeply concerning. I mean, I think, and I think I've said it before. I think IBM is doing some really interesting things, and we're playing a very active role as a company in mitigation and prevention and detection and a lot of the things that we talk about every week. And I think that's cool. I mean, I genuinely like to be part of that broader discussion around security and the work that we're doing. I think it's incredibly important. And I think we kind of, as data protection and storage and data services folks, have an active role to play in that as well. And it's going to be, there's a lot of work to do, Sean, to your point. I mean, it's a big effort. So anyway, that's my story. Oh, except I will just add that literally this morning, I got an email that I had requested a change of my Facebook password, which I didn't. So this is very personal to me. It's very real.
Starting to hit home, huh, Randy?
What?
It's starting to hit home.
Absolutely. First the brewery, now this. I mean, this
is terrible.
I won't stand for it. I won't stand for it.
So, Tricia, we can't go without a tool tip. So can you give us a tool tip for the week?
Yep, tool tips. Sorry, I don't have my helmet today, but today's tool tip has to do with our competitive group. And we have a fabulous competitive person up there, Fraser McIntosh, who goes out there and analyzes these other products, these other hardwares, these other offerings. And the thing I really like about this is anytime you go into a customer sale, they're going to say, well, how do you stack up against X, Y, or Z? And so Fraser really puts together these great points about how they compare the technology, the costs, and everything. And so he can be reached on Slack if you got a question for him from an internal IBMer. He's got all the information out in the seismic channel you can pull down. And he'll be doing a session at TechU that's really kind of directed at our end users so that they can learn how we compare to other products. So make sure you look out for that. And then, of course, if you're a business partner, you're able to connect and send him emails directly and request help. So that's another way to reach out to him.
Yeah, Fraser's awesome.
Yeah, Fraser is great. And the thing I like about Fraser, I just wanted to emphasize, especially for a TechU talk, of course you think you're going to show up at an IBM event and we're going to pound our chest and IBM's the greatest. I think he's very honest. He knows where the shortfalls are, and he knows where our strengths are, and he's very honest about it. And he's very good at delivering that information. So that's great. That's great advice there, Tricia. Thank you very much.
Cool.
Okay, so to the team, thank you all very much for today. Tricia, enjoy your time out of your home office.
Absolutely.
And we will pick this up next week, where we talk to another business partner, as we're going down the business partner series of the technology partners who are helping the IBM Protect and Protect Plus portfolio better together, I always say. So with that, we'll talk to you next week. Thank you.